In lesson 33, we continue studying the philosophy of the Kleshas. And we have arrived at Sutra 6 of Chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Asmita is the identity or blending together, as it were, of the power of consciousness, Purusha, with the power of cognition, Buddhi. The power of consciousness, in between bracket, called Purusha. Remember from the subtle anatomy, which we discussed in lesson 30, I think. Purusha is your soul. Purusha is the outer shell of the yin-yang model that we had on the whiteboard. Remember? Thank you. Buddhi is intellect. That is the power of thought, in fact. Here it is called the power of cognition. That's confusing. It's the way that we think. What is the difference between Buddhi and Purusha? Or what is the difference between thought and consciousness? Thought is limited to what you have experienced. Thought is limited to everything that you have been exposed to since you were born. So that is your education, family life, the upbringing of your parents, what your parents tell you and teach you, what the media presents you. I mentioned education already, has a huge influence, of course. Culture, the culture in which you grow up. Consciousness, however, Purusha, is unlimited. Is not limited by what you have learned. Or, to use a better word, how you have been conditioned. The problem that we are facing here is at least twofold, if not threefold. The big problem in the first place that we are facing here is, of course, that most people do not have enough energy for Purusha to function. So most people are limited to the way that we are conditioned. So we are judgmental. So we always distinguish between us and them, me and you. The interesting thing that happens when you practice yoga correctly, in a very subtle way but undeniable, unmistakable, is that you develop more energy, and not just that, that energy starts to rise up and slowly starts fueling Purusha. This is what we call awakening, or the opening up of consciousness. And that is when you start to perceive in a different way, including yourself. You start to connect with the real self, which is beyond your conditioning, which is beyond what you have been taught, told, and trained to think. That's also when you stop being judgmental, or at least in a natural way, it diminishes your tendency to be judgmental. That's when you stop discriminating more or less between us and them and me and you. Patanjali here is putting his finger on a very complex issue, which is ego, which is very human. It is human nature to function in this way, as long as there is no Purusha functioning, higher consciousness opening up. And in fact, it is the cause of most of the suffering that we experience in life. It is the cause of practically all conflict that we come across in life. So I've made jokes about this before, from the beginning of the course, so that you gradually become familiar with ego and with the depth or where yoga is bringing us, which is the depth of your own psychology, functioning on very deep levels that most people simply are not aware of, and it will take years for you to put it all into place and start controlling it. Asmita is ego. And functioning from ego, when I meet you, I will say, "Hi, I'm Ron, I'm Dutch, I'm a yoga teacher, this is my age, and this is what Dutch people do. I'm different from you, because you are not." I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this is how we think, this is how we function. I'm not Dutch. Yeah, by accident I was born there. But if I keep holding on to the idea that I'm Dutch, I put myself in a prison and I limit myself enormously. If I keep holding on to the idea that I'm male, I put myself in a prison and limit myself enormously. If I keep holding on to the idea that I'm a yoga teacher, same story. I put myself in a prison and limit myself enormously. I'm sure I've told you several times, if not many times already, I'm not a yoga teacher. I happen to know something about yoga and I love to share it. I'm very passionate about it. I'm not even Ron, if I would say I'm just Ron. Actually, that's a name that is given to me. But you feel. That is why probably you became attracted to this class. You feel my assets. You feel what is beyond that superficial idea of a man from the Netherlands who is a yoga teacher. If I would stay in that prison, this yoga class would be like every other class. I call them fashion yoga or modern yoga. And you would be bored. You wouldn't sacrifice 20 Sundays in a row for almost 5 months for just a boring average yoga class that you can get on every street corner studio. That is your ability to feel vibration, to feel energy. And you've done that subconsciously. But knowing how it works, you can learn to apply it more and more consciously in your life. That is also how you learn to trust the voice of Purusha. Because most people find it very difficult to distinguish between the the voice between Purusha and Buddhi, or the battle between the head and the heart. Most people find that difficult. I have found it difficult also for many years. But with time, especially if you know how it works, consciously, theoretically, technically, with time, practice makes perfect, and you become more and more accurate at determining the voice that is speaking to you. Is it your head or is it your heart? Still, sometimes I find it difficult. And then you just have to close your eyes and connect. Meditate. Contemplate. And even then, even still, sometimes you just have to make a guess. In English you call it an educated guess. You make, if you're not certain, you follow your feeling, you make a guess, an educated guess, with the idea that you might be wrong. But not afraid of failure. You give it a chance, you give it the benefit of the doubt, you follow the hunch, you follow the guess that you made, and if it proves to be wrong, you became a little bit wiser. That is how you have to look at this. Practice makes perfect, especially when we fail. It is ego standing in the way of learning from failure, so that is why ego is so important in yoga. Most specifically, of course, overcoming ego, going beyond ego. So who are you? Are you American? Korean? Vietnamese? Philippine? Who are you? No. You are, in the first instance, you are Purusha. That is your underlying vibration. Then when you talk about ego, ego can function in two different ways. There are yoga teachers that say ego must die, giving the impression that ego is useless, something to get rid of. I tell you that is not possible. Ego cannot be gotten rid of. Without ego, you are nothing anymore. But if ego is functioning subconsciously and you're not in control of it, it leads to all kind of kleshas coming your way. It leads to all kind of conflict. If ego, however, is under control, it helps you to express yourself based on your higher consciousness. What ego dying really means is not to get rid of it, because that realistically is impossible. But your ego dies when you are confronted with ego, through misery, through pain. We will come to that in the following sutra. But you learn to control ego simply by becoming aware of it. By becoming aware of how it leads you to act and react that leads to misery. Nobody wants misery, right? The normal or the human way of acting and reacting when ego is triggered is to fight. And it just makes things worse. it multiplies the misery and the conflict. When you start to understand that, you learn to take a step back. When ego is triggered, which always results in a what we mentioned this morning, often a knee-jerk reaction based on emotion, you take a deep breath. You count to 10. You sit on your cushion, you close your eyes. And that ability allows you to take a step back and to have a full oversight over what is happening, including the emotions involved, and will allow you to make a sensible decision or a sensible reaction. And instead of multiplying the misery, you develop the ability to reduce, diminish the misery. Last week we finished with the sutra where Patanjali told us that he used the word attenuate. We attenuate the Kleshas, which is difficult language for diminishing our misery. Some examples of identification. You know, soccer. In Europe, soccer is very popular. You know about the hooligans in England, in Holland, the Netherlands. The hooligans. Hooligans are people who identify very strongly with their sports club. And that sports club is usually very strongly identifying with the city in which it is in. Amsterdam has Ajax as its home soccer club. Rotterdam is Feyenoord. Eindhoven is PSV. It's war between those supporters. Sensible people say they are thugs, they are crazy. What the hell are they doing? What they are really doing is they derive strength out of their identification with a club, a soccer club in this case. But there's lots of violence involved. It's like tribal war between Amsterdam and Rotterdam. That is identification. Being anti-gay, being anti-homosexual, that's the same kind of issue. I am good and they are bad. But if everybody functions like that, everybody is bad except yourself, and everybody thinks in the same way, making you bad in other people's eyes. It's endless. And it is the reason why nobody's happy. Governments manipulate you to identify. When you hear the national anthem, what do you feel? Goosebumps. And your chest swells up, and your throat swells up, and oh, this is our anthem, our national anthem. That's been pumped into you since you started going to kindergarten. It's even punishable by law if you insult the flag, the national flag. which is just a piece of cloth like my t-shirt. You understand a little bit what this is about and how dangerous, in fact, this confusion is between functioning on a lower level, which is thought, and a higher level, where you have all the insight. On higher levels of yoga, to the question, who are you? You simply say, I'm nothing. Sutra 7. That attraction which accompanies pleasure is raga. We are discussing the Kleshas here. Do you recognize that? Last week we had ignorance. Today we started with ego. Out of ego comes attachment. But Patanjali makes a very interesting observation here. He uses the word raga. And raga, if you know a little bit about New Age music, raga is a music genre. Raga is Indian New Age music. And it's usually very melodious, trying to create an atmosphere of nature with water, sound of water dripping or flowing, with very nice gentle flutes, trying to create a very peaceful atmosphere. And the songs of this genre are often titled like a nice walk on a Sunday morning, or a quiet Sunday morning walk in the park, or a beautiful full moon night, or a day on the beach, or something like that. Always something in nature. Raga is a deep emotional attachment. Have you noticed when you wake up on Sunday morning and you don't have to go to yoga class? So usually on Sunday morning, the feeling that you have is very different from when you wake up on Monday morning. That feeling is raga. When you wake up on Monday morning, you feel very different from when you wake up on Friday morning. That feeling is raga. Friday morning you wake up, you jump out of bed because TGF. Thank God it's Friday. One more day of work or study, and then 2 days weekend. That is why you feel different. Monday, it's the opposite. It's the end of the weekend and you think, oh, I have to, 5 days again, I have to, oh. That's raga. If you have been to a place and years later you come back and you feel familiar, you feel you're so happy to be back in that place again. That's raga. The feeling of the street where you were born. Since I came to Korea 23 years ago, I've been back to the Netherlands 6-7 times maybe. But one thing that I always do is I grab a bicycle and I visit the places that I know. The street where I was born, the street where I grew up, the neighborhood, the park, the lake where I spent so many hours, days, the forest, close to home. That's raga. That's why you get homesick. If you move far away from everything that is known and familiar, for some people that is so severe that they go back home. In the years that I've been in Korea, there have been various people that became so unsettled, so upset, emotional. They quit their job, packed their bags, and just went back home. You know why? Because they are literally uprooted. They don't wake up with raga anymore. And they go through the neighborhood and they don't feel raga anymore. And they take a bus or a subway and they end up getting off the transport, public transport, in a place, and they don't feel raga. So it's very deeply rooted in the human being. Simply try to be aware of that. Just like with ego, it's not something that you can get rid of. I think last week or the week before I told you that I hardly listen to music anymore. Why? Because of raga. It awakens memories in me, emotions in me from the past. I'm not in the past anymore. And if you haven't listened to that music for a long time, that memory becomes very disturbing, very painful. So why would you torture yourself like that? Why? Because of raga. The big problem here is the attachment that we have, even when it is a deep emotion. That is the human being. That is human nature. Kind of enjoying the misery. Kind of enjoying the memory that technically, actually, really is upsetting you, is disturbing you, is hurting you. Because of ego, we attach ourselves to that. And there is no difference between a positive memory or a negative memory. We do the same with both of them. Simply be aware of it. Now you also understand, again, why the practice of pratyahara is so important. Because the moment that you become aware of something that is truly disturbing, you now have a switch that you can turn. Before, you were just a victim because it all happened subconsciously. Because it's human nature. Now, the moment that you become aware of it, you remember that actually you don't have to let it happen. That is the switch that you have inside. You turn the switch, which is pratyahara. Enjoy. Enjoy the neighborhood where you were born and grew up and played so many hours with so many friends. The school that you attended. But do it consciously from now on. Do not passively lose yourself in that emotion, good or bad. Why is this important? Because of the process that we are in with our yoga practice. Everything is energy. A lot of our energy is scattered, and that scattering of energy renders us ineffective in the way that we function. Based on yoga, of course, we look at it from a perspective of higher consciousness, but you can't replace the word yoga with the word life, because yoga really is life. It's the science of life. If you apply everything that you learn only to the practice of yoga, it becomes an empty shell. It becomes boring, superficial. Why would I do all these difficult things and consider all these difficult theories and philosophies? It's just only for my yoga practice? No, it's about life. The past is raga. You know, people who enjoy visiting bars, not once in a while, but frequently. I have done that in my 20s. What do? You drink beer, drowning yourself in the past, your karma. Maybe that's necessary for a period of time, but for most people it's the end station, because you deteriorate and you go down more and more until you get sick and you die. As a yogi, you want to go to a bar? Do so. Enjoy it, but go through the process consciously. See what it does with you. I enjoyed it up to the point that I realized that I would not get anywhere with my life if I would continue to do that. I would realize that if I would not give myself a kick in the butt and start doing what I really want to do, I would regret for the rest of my life. That is the power of consciousness. That is the power of the yogi. You don't deny the past. You don't suppress it or oppress it or ignore it. But you start going through it consciously, so that at some point you can take control of the process, the mind process, the emotions involved, and you will preserve a lot of energy that in the past you lost, scattered, subconsciously, unknowingly, to past memory and past experience. And you now start canalizing that energy towards your future. I have noticed, not only myself in my life, but in my students, that many people take a big step after practicing yoga. In terms of a whole new study, a whole new job, career. Moving to another country and starting a whole new life. That requires a lot of energy that you canalize towards it in a very natural way, because energy is inherently restless and wants to manifest. If that energy is scattered, you just go through your daily motions, which is what most people do. Wake up, go to work, come home, enjoy a meal and a glass of wine and go to bed again. You now have spare energy. And apart from the duties that you have, in terms of work, study or family, on top of that you have spare energy which you start directing towards something you deep in your heart really want. That is the transformation. That is your connection with Atman, your true characteristics that will manifest itself, that will reveal itself in terms of consciousness, and then gradually starts manifesting because you start channeling energy towards that. You take from the past and you canalize it towards the future. That is why this is important. This is not just a theory or a philosophy from the past. It's very deep knowledge about human psychological functioning. Very interesting, very powerful. The music that I can play without losing myself in the past, I mentioned it before, probably in the beginning of the course. It's the music of Enigma and Deep Forest, which is very spiritual music. It's yoga in music. It brings energy up instead of down to the lower emotions. On a side note, a funny side note, New Age is kind of a misnomer, kind of a wrong labeling. Do you know New Age? What is New Age? It's old age. Because New Age people reject all the new. No? Remember when the smartphone came into the market, New Age people refused to use a smartphone. Yeah, you recognize that? Well, I've seen what those people do. Some people who are technologically savvy, to the outside world they want to show, hey, I still have my old analog folder phone. In their back pocket they would have an iPod with which they could access Facebook and email and other things. But in their back pocket, hidden. Only once in a while they would take it out and check and put it away again. They're so proud of their old phone. And they claim to be New Age. If you are really New Age, you embrace the new and use it to your advantage. Don't become a slave of it. Use it to your advantage. And besides, you know, we learn the yamas and the niyamas. Just be honest. Instead of fooling everybody, including yourself. New Age, old age. Questions? Okay, Sutra 8, the last one before lunch. That repulsion which accompanies pain is dvesha. This is the fourth klesha, hatred. And we talked about that last week actually. Remember when I told you about taking a subway during rush hour and seeing an empty chair, an empty seat, going towards the seat and being elbowed out of the way, painfully and rudely. What happens? Rage, anger, hatred. How do you deal with that? By trying to connect with the essence of that person that elbowed you out of the way. People are often surprised that I don't get upset or angry. I can get angry, don't get me wrong. I can. But in most cases where people normally get upset or angry, I don't. Because there is a switchboard. After almost 40 years of yoga, there is a switchboard that when the first switch is turned, it doesn't stop there, where normally you get angry. But one switch leads to another switch, leads to another switch, leads to another switch. First there is the anger, but immediately you switch to another mode. And you contemplate what's going on here, and why, and who. Who is involved, who is doing this, or why. And you start seeing, feeling, a vibration, a picture. The picture that I painted last week. Where you see that the person that elbowed you out of the way so rudely has a history. This behavior is conditioned by necessity, out of survival. And although that need of survival is not present anymore in the modern and wealthy society that we now live in, 40, 50 years ago, that need of survival was very real. So always try to put yourself into the other person's shoes. Always try to crawl into the other person's skin. Try to feel what they feel. Try to go onto the same wavelength. That is something that you nurture. That is something that you cultivate within yourself. This is why in spiritual circles and in religious circles, you're always being told to forgive. Forgive the people that harm you, that hurt you, that did wrong to you. But you do this for a very important reason. You do this for your own health and well-being. And you do not forgive in a superficial way, but you forgive by understanding people's ignorance. The person that hit me in the past did so out of ignorance. The person that elbowed me out of the way, causing me almost to explode in anger, in rage, is ignorant about their karma and their conditioning. Still suffering from a situation that occurred 40, 50 years ago. Still suffering from that every day. Not being able to enjoy life, be happy. although that situation has not occurred anymore since 40, 50, or even 60 years. When you see that, I mean really see that, your heart opens up and the rage fades away and is replaced by compassion. Not fake, not superficial, but because you really connected with the essence of that person that committed the crime, the abuse. There's evil in this world, no mistake about it. But we have laws for that. It's not easy, huh? But for your own sake, for your future, for your health, your happiness and your well-being, is something to seriously consider. It is again ego that will be the big obstacle here, that will not allow you to move on. So that is a struggle that you will be dealing with. But in the end, you will win. In the end, you will overcome. But remember, it's emotion, it's ego. Just first, in the first instance, try to be conscious of that. Questions? Yes?
How is Purusha and Atman is different?
Atman, Purusha is the outer shell. Atman is two shells inside. So you have Purusha, then you have Avyakta, the unmanifested self, and then you have Atman. So Atman is where Purusha finds its way to express itself. If there is energy in sufficient amounts available on that level. In most people it is not, so we express ourselves the way that we are conditioned, based on our identifications. When energy rises up, your identifications are gradually, slowly replaced by what you truly feel to be, by Atman. And that's how you become a universal being. That is when you start identifying with other people regardless of where they are from, or how old they are, or whether they are, regardless of their gender. Okay, let's have a short break.